are, I'd like to move on to some of the underlying issues that prompts for us and that are at work very much, even as we speak, in the academic environment within which a place like Wheaton College has to live and make its way. And I really want to deal with three issues in general, and then I want to turn to those three issues as they apply to Wheaton College. In understanding the identity of a Christian college, what do we mean by a Christian college? Well, in this book, the second chapter is given over entirely to exploring two models, trying to, again, get some clarity in our thinking to keep us from confusing or conflating things that really need to be distinguished if we're going to make sense of ourselves. I lay out two models, what I call the umbrella model and the systemic model of what are called Christian institutions. The umbrella model is a good example of it would be at Notre Dame. Here you have a sponsoring tradition, religious tradition, that puts together an institution and creates sort of an umbrella. Underneath that umbrella is a critical mass of voices representing that tradition. But also under the umbrella are a variety of other voices. Not everybody under the umbrella of this institution holds their Roman Catholic stance built into Notre Dame, and there's the attempt to maintain a critical mass of Roman Catholic voices, influences, certainly at the administration, board, faculty level, in a place like Notre Dame. But then there are plenty of other voices too, including Protestant voices and even Jewish voices and atheist voices and so on. And all these other voices need to do is to agree to recognize this dimension of the institution and to understand the mission of the institution, but they're not asked to sign on and become Roman Catholics in order to teach there. This is the umbrella model at work. This is a very common model. Most of the Catholic universities are of this model. Most of the historically what were Protestant institutions were of this model. I call it the umbrella model, simply because the sponsoring religious tradition produces this umbrella underneath which there is a privileged voice of this tradition, but there are other voices as well, and there's a good lively discussion on that campus in and among these various voices, but with always the one voice being sort of the privileged voice. And Notre Dame is a really good example of that. And the big question in those kinds of institutions, and particularly Roman Catholic institutions, in fact, at Notre Dame, you find this question being raised all the time. You know, how much of that critical mass do you have to have for it to be truly Catholic, a Catholic university? Everybody knows that's a Catholic university, but nobody suggests that everybody on the faculty, for example, is a Catholic. But you do have to have that critical mass. And you need, in the book, I cite some people describing what a Catholic university looks like and saying, here's what it takes to be a Catholic. And they're talking about the architecture and certain opportunities for worship and so on. But there needs to be this critical mass. And how much critical mass is there to be legitimate? And that's an open debate. And you can look at the Dukes and the Emorys and the other institutions that at one point had a critical mass of the sponsoring tradition, and now they're secular universities. It's just kind of dribbled away. 10 years ago, there was a lot of discussion about Vanderbilt that had that and is now no longer that. And there are questions about even places like Notre Dame. There's a discussion going on right now. The current president of Notre Dame is looking to rebuild, strengthen that critical mass because people are raising questions about whether it's really anymore a Catholic university or the way it's tending. I once closed the bar one night about 1 o'clock in the morning with the former provost of Notre Dame University. He was there to address a group of us who was a group of presidents at a meeting, and his topic was, the assigned topic was, will Notre Dame stay Catholic? And he is classically, this was probably 12 years ago, classically one of what the Vatican tends to think of as American cafeteria Catholics. He wasn't a priest. He was unlike most of the leadership there. His name is Timothy O'Mara, and he wasn't a big fan of Pope John Paul. And his basic answer was, no, it won't stay Catholic. And we had a very interesting discussion. And he was actually quite put out by some of the Protestants at Notre Dame, some of which are our own people, Wheaton people who are Protestants there, and complaining about how they are some of the more traditional voices wanting to keep Notre Dame Catholic, you know, and he's not happy about that. He was arguing for almost a Protestant view of the church, and unhappy with John Paul and how much authority in appointing bishops and so on that he had taken to Rome and so on. And his basic take on it is that, no, it won't stay Catholic over the next decades. There are others who are saying, no, no, it must, and they're trying to tighten it. It comes back to this critical mass. How much of that critical mass of voices of the sponsoring tradition do you have to have, in this case, to be Catholic? Well, that's the umbrella model, okay? That's one model of Christian institution. Then there is the systemic model. And Wheaton is a classic example of the systemic model. In the systemic model, what is true of the critical mass, it represents this sponsoring religious tradition, is true systemically of the entire institution. It's there all the way through. All of the faculty, for example, are people who are coming from this point of view. This is the systemic model. When we talk about Christian colleges, and certainly when I'm talking about in this book, it's the systemic model that I'm talking about. Wheaton and the other Christian schools like us. There is within the CCCU, the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities, about 110 institutions these days. And every one of them are systemic models in various ways. You can be systemic and be fairly broad or fairly narrow, but what you have in common is that everybody, certainly on your faculty, on your full-time faculty, ascribes to some definition of the institution itself. And for some, that definition is the full panoply of a denomination, let's say. And in order to be there, you have to sign off on all of the details of that denominational stance in order to teach at that institution. Others go all the way the other way to, it is basically simply a profession of faith in Christ. That's it. It's the term sometimes you will see is the EOCU, the Ecumenically Orthodox Christian University. And what you have here is basically say an Apostles' Creed definition. Let's put it that way, where all that anybody is signing off on is an Apostles' Creed, the Apostles' Creed. Well, you can imagine that's much more diverse community than, say, one where everybody is signing off on. Take Calvin as an example. Here's a CRC, Christian Reformed Church, and everybody there, in order to teach there, you've got to be able to sign off on the famous Reformed creeds. And these creeds are quite definite, and you've got to be a member of a CRC church, and so on. You really have to be a part of that tradition. Well, as against a school where the only stipulation, this is basically where Messiah is these days by their former president, Rod Sawatsky. We were on that campus one time, and he said that flat out. He says, our stipulation is basically the Apostles' Creed. And I said, Rod, you mean anybody who can affirm that Apostles' Creed, Catholic, Orthodox, Protestant, whatever, yeah, that's the definition of Messiah now. And that was a major broadening out of what Messiah had ever been before. But that's, well, he took Messiah there intentionally to make it this broader. But these are both, whether it's the full panoply of a denomination or a minimalist, sort of the Apostles' Creed, mere Christianity stance, it's still systemic because you're saying everybody in this institution at least stands there. That stance is systemic through the entire institution. That is what I'm referring to, the systemic model. So you can have broadly defined or narrowly defined. All of the CCCU schools are, by definition, systemic models because whatever their differences, and you've got Mennonite and Wesleyan and Reformed and, you know, places like Wheaton and all this variety of the Christian Church, Abilene Christian University, you've got, you know, a Church of God. You've got a variety of institutions, but what they all have in common is that, by definition, one of the stipulations for membership in the CCCU is that all of your full-time faculty must be professing Christians, which by definition makes you a systemic institution. It's a pretty minimalist definition. You don't have a bunch of denominational markers, but you have everybody. This stipulation is systemic through the entire institution. Well, this is the systemic model, and Wheaton is one of those.